For over 2 decades, CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, or Daniel Bryan, have had somewhat paralleling careers. From their time on the independent scene, through Ring of Honor, their struggles to superstardom in the WWE, and now the turmoil of AEW. Both men are universally respected in the wrestling industry, and although Punk is far more polarising, both Punk and Bryan have a claim to being recognised as the best of their generation. So, how exactly do these two seemingly intertwined entities feel about each other and this story? Welcome back to One Full Theory. In today's video, we're going to be looking at Bryan Danielson's 2015 autobiography, Yes, where he provides us his thoughts on Punk and their intertwining journeys. Stick around until the end to hear my thoughts on the book and how their relationship is now in 2023. I first met Punk in 2002 at a 16-man tournament called the Jersey J Cup. I'd heard about him and Colt Cabana because the two of them were tearing it up in the Midwest independent scene, but had yet to meet either of them. At the show, we exchanged a passing hello, but there were several different locker rooms, and Punk was changing in a different one than I was, so we never really got a chance to chat. All of a sudden, after his second round match with Reckless Youth, I saw both Punk and Cabana rushing out of the building in the middle of the show. It turned out that Punk had fractured his skull during the match and had to head to the hospital immediately. Fractured skulls, kids. That's one of many reasons you don't try this stuff at home. Punk later became a very important part of Ring of Honor too. The company was in the doldrums after a reported scandal in 2004 involving owner Rob Feinstein. But a 3-match rivalry between Punk and Samoa Joe created great DVD sales and almost single-handedly lifted Ring of Honor out of its funk. Punk and I did a lot of the same shows, but for some reason we didn't wrestle very much on the independents, though when we did, it was fun. We once wrestled for Full Impact Pro in Florida for nearly 45 minutes in front of fewer than 30 people. That's why it was all the more special when we got to face each other several times on pay-per-view for the WWE Championship. CM Punk wasn't just the perfect opponent because we'd known each other for so long. The hardcore fans sometimes turn against the people they perceive to be pushed too hard by WWE, like what happened with Sheamus after WrestleMania. But Punk wasn't one of the WWE's chosen ones. He had climbed his way to the top by consistently being the most entertaining person on the show, with both his wrestling and his interviews. The same type of fans who were cheering for me like cheering for him even more. When you're trying to be a bad guy, you absolutely need that. At the time, Punk was in a strange position as well. Most of the top bad guys on the show were positioned to face John Cena, like Brock Lesnar was. Then, after John beat him, somewhere down the line, they'd wrestle Punk after they'd already lost momentum. Even though I'd lost to Sheamus, I was getting stronger and stronger reactions from the crowd and seemed to be coming up on this upswing. So, I was a good fit and even better opponent for Punk at the time. WWE was comfortable putting us in a championship match on the pay-per-view, but didn't think we could carry the main event position. Our first title match, for example, was at Over the Limit 2012. We had a great match, but the show was main evented by John Cena versus John Laurinaitis. We were, however, entrusted with being the main event at non-televised live events, the first of which actually turned into a disaster. Prior to the match, I dressed the crowd and did my best to get them to boo me, but my promo just ended up being goofy. Punk did a goofy bit after that, and though none of it was bad, our main event match was a street fight. We made the mistake of taking comedy too far, and it was impossible for people to get into the violence of this match. Unfortunately, we were never able to get them back. Afterward, John Cena asked me what I thought of my match with Punk, and I admitted we didn't get the reaction we needed. He responded, "That's right, that was not a main event," and he was 100% correct. The crowd came to be entertained, and they enjoyed some of the comedic elements, but it took them away from the purpose of the match. I've always been confident in my ability to regain control of matches when they seem to be flying off the handle, but I'd let it get too far. And that was not a good thing, especially as a relatively new main event player. Because our match was so bad, the next evening, Punk and I were moved to a spot before intermission, and Cena's match slid into the main event instead. Punk was furious. He knew we didn't have a good match, but he also knew we could fix it. He fought for us to be in the main event, and he got it. We didn't do any goofing around that night and focused exclusively on tearing down the house, and we did. From then on, He and I were in the main event at the live events. My last match with Punk was a no disqualification WWE Championship match at the Money in the Bank 2012 pay-per-view event. We had what I thought was a really good match, but that's not what I remember most about it. When I found out about how short my WrestleMania match was going to be a few months earlier, I anticipated a need to change my character. I wanted to become unhinged by the loss and move toward a more crazy, militant, revolutionary type. Like a crazy Che Guevara thing. So, I talked to my friend Jill Thompson, a comic artist, and she created this awesome gear that would match this mentality. It included a new logo with a DB placed within an anarchy symbol and ripped into the back of a green military jacket. Maroon paint came out of those rips and out of torn kick pads, creating an image of gear bleeding. I loved it, but since the crowd changed everything, it never felt like the right moment to burst out the new gear. I thought a no disqualification match might be the right moment. I knew people within WWE wouldn't like the gear. It was too much of a departure from what I'd been wearing before, so I hid the jacket all day and wore shorts over my trunks until right before I went out. Keep in mind, this is about as rebellious as I get, wearing unapproved gear. I passed through the curtain into the arena, and when I got to the ring, referee Chad Patton leaned in and told me to take the jacket off. I wasn't quite sure I'd heard him correctly, so I asked, "What?" Chad told me Vince himself had directed him to tell me, "Take that jacket off." I did as I was told. Afterwards, I felt bad because our producer, Dean Malenko, was the one who really got yelled at for it, and he didn't even know anything about it. And unfortunately, I've never been able to wear the gear since. That was the last televised match I ever had with Punk. You can never say never, but I suspect I'll never get to wrestle him again. For some reason, I always thought the two of us would someday have a WrestleMania match against each other, and it would be a modern version of the Bret Hart Shawn Michaels Mania match that I loved when I was in high school. Some things just aren't meant to be. Okay, so we're going to stop it there. And as far as WWE authorized books go, Bryan's autobiography is a really great read. He is honest and unafraid to criticize decisions that we've just heard. Throughout the book, there's lots of criticisms of booking decisions that he's not happy with, creative choices that he second guesses, and obviously one of the big ones being his 17-second match at WrestleMania with Sheamus that he alludes to in that excerpt. So the praise that he gives CM Punk is absolutely authentic, I believe. It's also really interesting to hear Bryan compare himself and Punk to Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. And whilst all four men were absolute masters of their craft inside the ring, I do wonder if it speaks to a deeper distrust, personality clash maybe, between Bryan and Punk, that Bryan sees reflected in that infamous Hart and Michaels rivalry. I'm not going as far as to say that they disliked each other, but as he alludes to and steps around here, it wasn't like they became friends, even though they were in a lot of the same places at the same time. And I wonder if, given more exposure, perhaps the longer stint in AEW, if a similar distrust born from one-upsmanship, just like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, would have flourished. Now, throughout this book, and this passage included, I think you get a sense of Bryan's confidence in his abilities, and for me, that often opposes his personality. So, an example of this is that he is someone that doesn't own or watch a TV, yet he is still so self-assured in his ability as a performer. So just a really interesting dynamic personality, and I think that's something that's helped captivate audiences and serves the longevity of Bryan Danielson as well. Finally, with everything that's happened with CM Punk and AEW in the last 12 months, how timely is it that we hear Bryan's belief that they may never wrestle each other again? Now, many would agree that that match would have been a WrestleMania main event contender, and it does just feel like AEW may have now seen that opportunity pass them by. So, what do you make of Bryan Danielson's thoughts on CM Punk? Let me know in the comments if you think there was more to be told between these two, both either in WWE or in AEW. Do you agree that Bryan and Punk are the calibre of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels? Thank you so much for joining us. Please hit like and subscribe before you leave. And until next time, this is One Full Theory, where we smarten up and smack down.